Tommy Vietor, welcome from the Pod Save America podcast, Pod Save the World podcast. We appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So I've been looking forward to this conversation. There was probably a time where you and I would be on maybe different sides of the Democratic base, but I feel like what's happened recently is very emblematic of the times, that there appears to me to be this unification of the Democratic base and radicalization of the Democratic base, and I use the word radicalization with the most positive connotation. And we were just talking about this before we came on here. The I've Had It podcast is another example of this, where it's almost like all of us, even sometimes if I turn on MSNBC, they sometimes sound like me. I remember listening to them talk about Kilmar Abrego Garcia and some of Trump's, shoving innocent people in concentration camps, and they're losing it just as much as I am. Is that your reading of the moment too, that in this moment we're really going through almost like a Democratic base Tea Party movement where everybody's sort of on the same page and we are dragging Democratic leadership kicking and screaming to the same place?
I think there are some elements of that. Like the Tea Party was ostensibly about spending, so that was more like issue driven. I feel like this is more, everyone in the Democratic Party is like, why are we not fighting everything Trump is doing tooth and nail? And there have been some very high-profile moments where it feels like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries have not been doing that, and everyone's like, why? Why? Like on the merits, on the politics, like what they're doing is wrong. Why aren't we fighting hard? So I think people are just pissed, and they're not afraid to say it.
Yeah, to me, there's two major schisms. One of them is that, and I think you're right that that's probably the biggest schism of like, we are ready to just aggressively oppose these people, and we don't even see you putting up a fight. And the people who have sort of stepped into the void to put up that fight are Jasmine Crockett, their AOC, it's Bernie, it's now, Zohran Mamdani. Tim Walz. But the other schism, I think, is around Israel. And now you have this issue where there is a vast gulf between where the overwhelming majority of the Democratic base is and where Democratic leadership is. And so I'm curious your view of how important that schism is going to be in terms of defining politics in the Democratic Party going forward.
Guys, it's crazy. I've never seen leadership be so far behind voters. I mean, the CNN had some polling the other day that I think they polled, who are you more sympathetic to, the Israelis or the Palestinians? And I think it was like plus 11 or plus 17 Israelis in 2017. And now it's like plus 30, plus 40. It was like a 50-point swing. And you were just not seeing that reflected in the commentary from someone like Chuck Schumer or Hakeem Jeffries or Senate leadership. And I think like anyone who is sort of our age or younger has seen the Israeli government as led by Bibi Netanyahu in various iterations. And they're just like, why are we giving full-throated support diplomatically, militarily, in every way possible to this like right-wing, wannabe autocrat dictator that is massacring people before our eyes on social media? And it's like, when are we going to catch up? When is the Democratic Party going to realize like, this is not okay? This is not a healthy relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I look at that Republican politician, Randy Fine.
Oh, my God.
And how he comes out, like, at least once a week, and he says the most grotesque, disgusting things you've ever heard. He called Ilhan Omar a terrorist. I think he even called Rashida Tlaib a terrorist in the past. He has multiple times said to nuke Gaza. He said, do to them what we did to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that imbalance, I think, is the thing that drives me crazy more than anything, is that if Rashida Tlaib says something pro-Palestine, they find a way to censure her, and you even get some Democrats that hop on board. But here you have this absolute psychopath calling to nuke over 1 million innocent people, and it's just crickets.
I know, and it makes me crazy. Like, there were these comments made by a musician named Bob Vylan at Glastonbury that, like, I think they chanted "death to the IDF," right? And like, I don't support that. I like taken literally. I think that's hate speech. Bigger picture, strategically, I sort of think it's like just I would bucket as unhelpful. Like, say what you want to say. I'm not telling musicians what to say, but like that's my personal opinion. But we talked more about that than the media covered the defense minister of Israel Katz, talking about a plan to ethnically cleanse the entire Gaza Strip, right? What the fuck is happening?
And to concentrate them in camps.
Yeah, and Marco Rubio did more to crack down on Bob Vylan, like took away his visa, didn't let him visit the country. He took like a number of tangible policy actions. They did more on that than they did to stop sending weapons to Israel as Netanyahu carpet bombs innocent people on a daily basis.
Yeah. Can I tell you guys, it's not just the left where I think this is a real political problem. I'm a sicko. And so I've been consuming a ton of InfoWars, Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, like a lot of right-wing stuff in the last few months, because I've been watching how they've like been talking about the Iran war. And then you add in this Epstein stuff. And there is a revolt happening on the right. It is a real thing. Maybe they'll get over it. Maybe it won't impact Trump politically. But it's not like they're also folding the Jeffrey Epstein into this broader anti-Israel narrative on the far right. Like it is taken as an article of faith that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent. And like pretty reasonable people are like, oh, maybe they put out this DOJ report absolving, saying there's no Epstein client list because Netanyahu was visiting. Like those are the sorts of conversations that you're hearing on like Tucker's show, for example. And I really think that plus Iran is going to lead to the far right abandoning Israel, and not just for like part of it is anti-Semitism, right? Like I watched a 2-hour debate with Nick Fuentes, but part of it is like just kind of like substantive of why are we spending money here thing.
Yeah, you'll also hear some of those conversations on our shows as well. But
yeah, but the difference is So I've been listening closely to what the right is saying, and what you'll find is in the first day they were scrambling, but then after the first day they settled on some narratives. One of them was like, actually it was Biden and the Democrats that destroyed all the Epstein stuff, so Trump is in the clear. Another one was, oh, actually Trump is trying to blackmail the deep state.
Yes.
That's why he did this.
Yeah, the other one is Pam Bondi is the villain here.
Well, right, that's like the more honest, they're all dishonest, but the more honest of them will at least single somebody out in the administration and say, it's Pam Bondi's fault. But it's like, no, it's not. It's Donald Trump. The buck stops with him. He's the one who told the FBI and the DOJ to do it.
Yeah.
So I'm a little more cynical when it comes to the right, because I always find them like, yes, they'll criticize, but if you listen closely, it always somehow gives Trump a pass. And we saw this in the first term. Whenever Trump would do anything horrible, they'd be like, fucking John Bolton, like the neocons around him made him do more drone strikes than Barack Obama.
Right.
The neocons around him made him kill Qasem Soleimani. And so I'm a little more cynical and jaded when it comes to the right, where I do feel like ultimately, and you're already seeing this with Alex Jones, right back in line.
Well,
one day of revolt, right back in line.
But here's where I think you have a point, though, which is that I don't think it's going to hurt Trump with his base, but I do think if you look at younger Republicans in particular,
that's a good point. Yeah.
The polling on Israel is very different.
Yeah.
And, with the Democratic base, forget it. It's like it's over and done. But young Republicans as well, there's now more sympathy with Palestinians than with Israel. And that is an extraordinary sea change.
Yeah, I watched that Alex Jones stuff too, and it took him about a couple hours to decide that like this was Donald Trump somehow blackmailing back the deep state.
After he cried and puked.
I'm gonna puke.
Yeah,
then he came to that.
I think Tucker Carlson is actually a really smart guy, and he's a really talented broadcaster, and he's kind of a dog with a bone. And this one, like I watched Cigar's long interview the other day on this, and they made a lot of like thoughtful, substantive points. So I think I'm with you. Like I think ultimately the kind of like far-right influencer class will find a thing that they are mad at Democrats about and focus on that. But there will be this younger sort of generation of folks who maybe voted for Trump for the first time because they thought he would restore trust or be America first. And they're like, wait, we're bombing Iran? Jeffrey Epstein, like he's getting a pass, I guess. We're giving weapons to Ukraine now. Like kind of what happened to the dude I voted for? And maybe they'll just sort of, I don't know, maybe tap out of politics, which I don't want to happen, but it's interesting to watch.
So I wanted to get your reaction, Tommy, just circling back to the sort of conversation about where the Democratic Party is and where the Democratic Party base is and the leadership is and where things go from here. Dean Phillips was on CNN, and he got asked a very interesting question about whether or not he thought there was room in the Democratic Party tent for someone like him and someone like Zohran Mamdani. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
And, one of the things that I guess one of the questions here is the current DNC chair, Ken Martin, fellow Minnesotan, used you as an example in saying the party is a big tent. It can welcome people from different ideological, geographic perspectives. I think he used the example of you couldn't win a race in Ilhan Omar's district and she couldn't win a race in yours. Is there room for you and Mamdani in the Democratic Party?
I think it's a fine question. I think it's one that many Republicans have been asking about whether there's room for traditional conservatives in a party now led by MAGA Republicans like Donald Trump. The answer ultimately, I think, is no. We do share many of the same values. In fact, most Americans share a lot of the same values. But as a political party, yes, you want diversity. You want some differences of opinion, perspective, life story, politics, and experience. But when you have socialists in the Democratic Party, I don't know how anybody could argue that would be beneficial for the party or for the country. Therein lies the great challenge. Same thing on the right, Omar. Is MAGA the future of the Republican Party? If it is, there is going to be a new, grand, successful third party in America because the overwhelming majority of Americans want neither far left or far right politics. They want decency, they want common sense, competency, and cooperation. And no party right now is elevating candidates who represent those ideals.
Now, I don't know if you saw this, Tommy, but they actually pulled Zohran's core policy proposals, and not just in New York City, but nationwide. Every one of them is wildly popular. So Dean Phillips wants to portray them as like some crazy radical ideals, when in reality, they are sort of the center of where most of the American public actually is when you're talking about, you know, affordability and economics.
It just seems like such a silly overreaction. Like, so many people are just having a meltdown about a New York City primary election with ranked choice voting in July. Like, everyone just calm down, Democrats. Like, there's absolutely room for Zohran Mamdani and Dean Phillips in this party if they want to be in the party. Like, people need, look, I'm not a member of the DSA, in part because I think there's sort of a normie reaction to the word socialist that's like this. Like, they think of it as, you know, socialism in Latin America versus like democratic socialism in parties you might find all across Europe. And like, I don't know, is Dean Phillips so offended by free buses or whatever? I mean, maybe this is just a sort of proxy for him being mad about Zohran's views on Gaza, or the fact that he sort of seems like an anti-Zionist, or frankly, he's had some sort of bad answers, I think, when pressed on questions like globalize the Intifada that make people wonder, make people question his character, right? Like, I'm not saying I do that, but I have a lot of normie Democrats in my life who will randomly text me when things pop up. I'm sure you guys have people like that too. You never hear from them about politics. And then once every 6 months, they'll be like, yo, why did New York vote for this guy who's a socialist? And what does that really mean? And does he really hate the Jews? And you explain to them, no, these are his actual positions, right? But I do think like there's some political work Mamdani has to do. But I mean, Dean Phillips should know better.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at it, to me, Zohran, even though he calls himself a democratic socialist, in the same way Bernie does, by the way, what they actually represent is social democracy. And I mean, it's basically a return to what the Democratic Party used to be, which is FDR-style policies. So when I look at it, and based on the polling you laid out, Crystal, he is the moderate. Right? Like, he is the one that's smack dab right in the middle of mainstream American opinion when he says stuff like freeze the rent in the most expensive city in the country. Right? And so I think the issue here is that the base gets that this guy actually is a true moderate in the sense that he's right smack dab in the middle of, mainstream American opinion. But it looks to me like people like Dean Phillips, leadership of the Democratic Party, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, et cetera, they are paid not to get it, because they take so much money, whether it be from AIPAC or whether it be from the military-industrial complex or the health insurance companies. And that's, I think, where we're at now, is that the Democratic base is kind of waking up to the fact that the leadership of the party is ill-equipped to deal with Trump, in part because so many of the donors that fund the right also fund some of the leading Democrats.
Yeah, there's also, like, I think when we say the base of the party, it's probably something different for Zohran than for the, 50 states Democratic Party, right? Like, Zohran's folks, like, they turned out a lot of people in Brooklyn, a lot of very progressive, younger Democrats. I think the, like, big picture base of the Democratic Party is like a 50-year-old black woman in North Carolina, right? Like, those are the people that in 2020 ultimately came home to Joe Biden because they thought he was sort of like more moderate and more likely to win elections.
They thought he was more electable. I mean, the case is, it's always been the case that the party ideologically has been more progressive. Medicare for all, for example, always polled very well, even in, a state like Mississippi with a more conservative Democratic base. They were persuaded that Joe Biden was the guy who could win. And Joe Biden did win the first election. So, I guess on some level they were correct. I think that what is different now is that since you now have the sort of mainstream, the Democratic Party that said, don't worry, we got this. This is how how you defeat Trump. Since that obviously failed, and because you have now this frustration over the lack of fight, I think that even those people you're talking about, that sort of normie Democratic base, I think it's very different. And you see it. Look, it's New York City. So, yeah, it's not, representative of the whole entire country. But Zohran won overwhelmingly among, like, Latinos. Certainly young people were a huge source of strength. And the caricature of, you know, oh, these like socialists can only win in the commie corridor with like white affluent, you know, lefty DSA types. He definitely blew that out of the water. He won more primary votes than any Democrat ever has in the New York City
double digits
mayoral race. So I do think, you know, on the one hand, I think you're right to say, look, it's a mayoral primary, like Democrats, relax. On the other hand, I do think it's indicative of something significant, especially the piece about Zionism, because if you can win as an avowed anti-Zionist in the New York City mayoral primary, I mean, Tommy, you tell me, because you know a lot of these politicians, you know, you have more access to them than we do. How many of them are going to be looking at that and thinking like, oh, I need to, like, what I can say about this is different than what I used to be able to say about this. And where the base is now is very different from where the base was previously. And I was really struck by, I don't know if you heard Ezra Klein talking to Chris Hayes, where he said not only was the anti-Zionism of, you know, Zohran not a put-off, and I think Ezra has evolved somewhat on where he is personally on Israel, but he said he decided not to rank Cuomo at all because he was so disgusted with the weaponization of anti-Semitism. So, I mean, do you think that there's a sort of political just among, like, you know, ambitious Democratic politicians, do you think that there is a rethinking that is going on right now on this issue of Israel in the wake of Zohran's ability to win in New York City with an anti-Zionist message?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, just one quick thing. Like, I'm not trying to diminish Zohran's victory in any way, shape, or form. It was incredible. He came from nowhere. He defeated a Cuomo in New York City. Like, I'm just saying, like, the Democrats were like, oh, God, we're going to lose the midterms. We're going to lose 2028 because of this New York mayoral candidate are morons and need to just, like, log off and do something else, right? I worked in politics for a long time. I worked in national security in the White House. I saw the way policy and speech on this issue can be policed in government and then policed on social media. And I feel like that policing of speech and policy views on Israel used to be very powerful. But like that card just has gotten played over and over and over again. Like Jonathan Greenblatt put me in an op-ed in the New York Post the other day calling me an anti-Semite because I said Bibi Netanyahu. Yeah, because I said Bibi Netanyahu dragged the United States to war with Iran, which is self-evidently true. Bibi Netanyahu started a war with Iran knowing he couldn't bomb the Fordo facility without U.S. bunker busters, and he needed us to do mop-up duty for him. That is a statement of fact, and he called me an anti-Semite. And my response to him was, I don't care what you say. You are a cynical, you were, first of all, you are destroying the reputation of a historically important organization, the ADL, that has done unbelievable work fighting for civil liberties in this country. And you are attacking people in the most cynical way because they're your political opponents and you want to hurt them and silence them. And in so doing, I think you are harming the actual work of combating anti-Semitism, which, by the way, I care about deeply. You know what I mean? My wife's Jewish. I drop my daughter off at a Jewish day school in the morning. I see 8 armed guards when I do that. She's 2 years old, right? Like, I care deeply about this. This is meaningful to me personally. And for this man to call me an anti-Semite because we disagree on Iran policy, my response is, fuck you.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not going to have any power with you. I'd love it. Tommy, could you talk a little bit more about what you just said about what you saw when you were in government? And, you know, I'd love for you to reflect also on if your views on Israel have shifted over time since you're out of the Obama administration. And, you know, as all of us, certainly my views have been hardened as we've watched this genocide unfold daily on our timelines.
Yeah, I mean, I just, Bibi Netanyahu was sort of like self-evidently a cynical actor. In my view. He never wanted a two-state solution. Almost everything he did was about playing for time and killing negotiations. And that's not to say like the Palestinians were always doing the right thing in negotiations. You know, there certainly were, you know, deals on the table that they should have taken with the benefit of hindsight. Anyway, we don't even know the history. But I think what the Democratic Party establishment and elites just don't understand is, like, when you would hear Joe Biden talk about Israel, he kept talking about Golda Meir. And it's, right? And who was like, what, she, prime minister in the 70s? It seemed like he genuinely still had a vision of Israel as this progressive, liberal bastion in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And anyone who sort of understands the current makeup of the government knows that the opposite is true. Like, there's this guy named Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's the national security minister. He used to have a photo on his wall of a man who murdered I think 29 Palestinians in a mass shooting.
Yep.
I think his first date with his now wife was visiting that person's grave. So these are extremists. These are terrorist sympathizers. And yet the United States funnels weapons to Israel. We provide diplomatic support. And I think a lot of people are just asking why. Why do we have to keep doing that?
Were you involved in those debates at the end of the Obama administration? I remember there was a resolution that was allowed to pass the UN Security Council
condemning the occupation.
Yeah, and were you involved in those debates? I mean, what did that look like on the inside?
I was out of there by 2013, but I remember, I mean, like, you know, Ben Rhodes, a lot of my close friends were in there, and it was like a knockdown, drag-out fight. And like part of it was just getting the United States to reflect its own policy at the United Nations, right? Like the settlements are illegal. Why can't we say that? Why can't we agree to a resolution, for example, like at the UN on that topic? And like, I mean, some of this gets summed up in the press as like kind of personal animus between Netanyahu and Obama, but like Netanyahu said like some openly racist, Islamophobic things. You remember that election where he was like, Arabs are going to the polls in droves. We need to turn out, right? He's like just a cynical, bad guy. He's unbelievably corrupt. He's so corrupt that they had to number his cases. There's case 1,000, 2,000, I think 3,000. He's gotten off. There's case 4,000. Like this man is taking hundreds of thousands of dollars of gifts. He's like giving telecom companies relief in exchange for good coverage. Like there's nothing about him that we should be supporting.
Yeah. So to talk a little bit more about your time with Obama, I'm curious about looking back now at the Iran agreement, which in my opinion was probably one of the crowning achievements of the Obama administration, or the Cuba normalization that happened, which I think was also great. Do you look back now and think like, holy shit, we didn't realize how good we had it, that eventually Trump would come in and Trump would effectively destroy the world order, I think it's fair to say, because this is a guy who made it so that the word of the U.S. is worth absolutely nothing when you pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement, when you pull out of the Iran agreement, when you lure Qasem Soleimani with talks of diplomacy to only murder him in front of the world. The message you're sending to the world, trade deals, Trump made a trade deal with Canada. Then when he gets back in there, he goes, who made this trade deal? We're not going to buy back this trade deal. It's like, do you look back now and think, wow, you thought you were on the path, like laying the foundation for something that would be built upon, and then Trump comes in with a sledgehammer and destroys it all and upends it? Yeah,
like I look back at the JCPOA, and at the time, like kind of the argument from the administration was we can make a deal with Iran or we can bomb them. And you would see the people on the right being like, how dare you suggest that we're warmongers and the only alternative to this agreement is war. It's like, well, turns out that's what it was. And I look at the Cuba normalization deal and just how obvious and common sense it seemed to be, even if it wasn't politically popular in the near term, and I'm incredibly proud of that. The things I look back on and I think we screwed up badly was like the Afghanistan surge or the war in Libya. Like any time the United States sends the US military to solve what is at essence a political problem, it ends badly. And I think what's frustrating for me is in Washington, it is still easier to go to war. There's less debate. There's less conversation than there is about cutting a diplomatic deal. And like part of that is that Democrats were cowardly around the JCPOA. They didn't full-throatedly embrace it. You know, everything started with all this throat clearing about how imperfect the deal was, yada, yada, yada. It's like, yeah, no shit. It's a deal with the Iranian regime. It's not going to be perfect, but it's better than going to war with them. And look, people might say, well, Trump bombed them and it wasn't World War III. I know, but like, I don't think this story is over. And I don't think we should be assume that everything's fixed now. Yeah, and also waging an illegal and offensive strike against a country that didn't attack us and wasn't going to attack us and wasn't building a nuke. I mean, that's like, we're the baddies in that scenario. But you said something interesting. Those details.
I want to piggyback off something you said because I found it very interesting. You mentioned Cuba, the normalization, and how it wasn't particularly politically popular. This is something that I have really strong feelings on. When I look at, for example, the Biden years, when Biden did something good, I didn't see him get much backup. So, like, for example, when he pulled out of Afghanistan, regardless of the fact that it was messy, it was absolutely better than the alternative. I think it's unequivocally a good thing in the long run. Is that something that concerns you, too, about Democratic politicians and also Democratic media, in that we aren't on message and aggressive enough, because when you talk about the Cuban normalization, I covered that. I loved it. I was giving it high praise. The Iran agreement, I loved it. I was giving it high praise. I would debate anybody on those things, saying that these things are unequivocally positive. Does that bother you that we can have a scenario where Obama or Biden, when they do something good, the other Democratic politicians aren't there to back them up, and then we don't have the same sort of media? Whereas on the right, you got Fox News, One American News Network, Newsmax, Daily Wire, all the online outlets, they're all hammering home the same message. Even if it's something objectively horrible Trump does, they're out there telling everybody it's amazing. And so I feel like that's an issue on our side, where we haven't all gotten on the same page on the unequivocally good things and said, this is good, and drive the poll numbers up, as opposed to just pretending that the poll numbers are like this stagnant thing that we have no control over.
Yeah, no, the media infrastructure disadvantage is so real. And frankly, I think it's growing. Like, MSNBC is getting spun off and kind of shrinking, and Fox News's numbers are just going up and up and up inexorably. And if you look at YouTube, for example, like the right-wing accounts, like the Daily Wire has got like 7 million subs. Like, you know, the progressive side is much smaller. So yeah, I think that's a huge problem. I mean, on the Cuba thing specifically, I was sort of more referring to in my head views of the deal, the normalization agreement with Cuban Americans in Florida. Now, I was probably naive to think they would ever be happy with a deal with, you know, like a Castro government, because, you know, they're kind of holding out hope that they could go back to how things were before the revolution. But an aside there, on Afghanistan, I totally agree with you. It was unequivocally the right thing to end the war. I give Biden a lot of credit for it. I did at the time. I think on that one, though, like, it was just hard to combat how horrific those final images were of people falling from planes, and then the Abbey Gate explosion. And I'm just sort of like, I thought about this a lot. I've asked like senior Biden officials, what if we had, you know, what if they had gotten out in the winter, for example, and just kind of like given the whole process more time? You know, there could have been issues then, because like basically the Taliban stopped shooting at us because they knew they were going to leave, and maybe what if they rev back up those attacks? So I don't know. It's an impossibly difficult problem. And I think it just speaks to the fact that when you invade a country, you start something that is very hard to end.
Yeah, but this is like the debate bro in me, though. I get triggered by this so much, because it's like Trump was out there saying countless times, we got to get out of that. What are we doing in Afghanistan? We got to get out of Afghanistan. We got to get out of Afghanistan. And then you look at the polling data on it, and it was like, what, 17% of the country wanted to stay in Afghanistan? So here comes a politician who's like, I'm going to do the thing you all want me to do. And then you got like even CNN and MSNBC, all the like nitpicking how it went down. And it's like, okay, what was the alternative? The alternative was to stay there, what, another decade? Another 2 decades? Which, by the way, whenever we decided to pull out, it was going to be ugly. It was going to be bad. So I don't want to spend another couple $1 trillion over there. I don't want to waste more American lives. I don't want to kill more innocent people in Afghanistan. By the way, there was a massive increase in civilian deaths under the Trump administration in Afghanistan. So that's part of my frustration, is that when I look at Trump and when I look at the right, they will take something that polls at like 7%, and they'll be like, we'll make it 51. Watch this, right?
Yeah.
Whereas on our side, it's like, oh, we did something good. Run and hide.
Well,
Hope nobody attacked you over it.
I'll tell you, what bothered me the most was, look, CNN's gonna, whatever, they're gonna point out the problems, and that's kind of their job. What bothered me was that there were very few Democratic electeds who were willing. It was basically like Ro Khanna was willing to go out and defend the policy, and that was about it. And that was wild to me, when you did have such large consensus. And it gets to the broader point you were making, Tommy, about that it's so easy to start these wars. You know, you get all kinds of fanfare. You'll get across the media spectrum, they're celebrating. Oh my God, look how we dropped that bomb on Fordo, and we're such badass, blah, blah, blah. And then, but to end those conflicts, it's the path of least resistance is just to let them keep going and just sort of like put it on the back burner and stop talking about it and kick the can down the road and hope that it's going to be some other guy or gal's problem. Because inevitably, when you end the war, you have to reckon with the reality of what that thing was. And obviously in Afghanistan, you know, by the end, like, what even were we doing? Like, we'd lost the plot on it some 20 years prior. So even maybe there was a way you could do it where you don't have the explosion, and maybe there's some like slightly less messy way to, but there was never going to be a non-catastrophic end, I feel like.
Remember the Afghanistan papers? Yeah. That was a story, I swear to God, I covered it like it was, you know, like it was the Zapruder film. Like, I was all over that. But nobody else was even talking about it. It was like one day, if that, in mainstream media. And it's like, This is where the conversation needs to be. We are pulling out because look at what we did when we were there. It was a horror story. It was full of military-industrial complex basically stealing from the American people and looting the treasury, and even people who were there, generals, were like, what the hell are we doing here? It's like, that's the real story. Hey guys, we just talked to Tommy Vietor of Pod Save America and Pod Save the World. We talked about the radicalization and unification of the Democratic base. We also talked about his role in the Obama administration working on foreign policy. He had a lot of insight. It was a really interesting conversation. Highly recommend you watch the whole thing. If you'd like to do that, sign up below on Substack.